what does any multinational need to do differently if it is to deliver consistent best practice? If it is to enable dignified and equitable access and inclusion for disabled people worldwide, as an employer and as a provider of goods and services. The PowerPoint deck is available on the GBDN website, and we'll give you the link very shortly. Please do circulate this widely, internally especially, since our aim is absolutely simple. We want to encourage, inspire, enable every responsible, sensible multinational to immediately set about creating similar global management and accountability structures for launch within, shall we say, 1 year. And we also, of course, are delighted that we'll be looking at what senior executive disability champions at global level do and say that really makes a difference when we consider enhancing the life chances and inclusion of all persons with disabilities as colleagues, potential colleagues, customers, board members, shareholders, and fellow citizens. However, before we go into the detail and move into our panel discussion, a few housekeeping bits and pieces, if I may. You'll see the slide in front of you, which if I read it, we see live captions are provided and can be activated by clicking the CC button. We have an international sign interpreter who will be visible throughout the webinar. This webinar is being recorded and will be shared for those unable to attend. All camera features for participants, as well as their microphones, are switched off. And please note that the chat function for participants is also deactivated. All questions to the panelists for the end of our conversation today can be submitted via the Q&A box during the webinar. So if I could just proceed with the introductions. So in terms of our distinguished panel, first we have Nick Hirons from GSK, who is their Senior Vice President, Global Ethics and Compliance, and Chair of this Global Disability Confidence Council. We're so grateful for the time he offered, helping us to capture in practical detail how this unique council works, how it adds value, the critical success factors, who does what. I particularly like Nick's very concrete, straightforward, and business-like advice to any CEO wanting to learn from GSK's long experience at how to hold the executive to account for its global disability-related performance. Really looking forward to his comments. Then it's great to have Margaret Smith from Accenture. She's the Senior Managing Director, Geographic Services and Business Operations. She's going to share her experience as a senior disability champion, tasked with shaping a more disability confident global Accenture culture. Accenture, of course, are long-standing members of GBDN. She's followed immediately by Andy Garrett, again, a member of the GSK Global Council, but also their Workplace Adjustments and Accessibility Lead, responsible for operationalizing, that great word, Andy, the Council's commitment to enabling every employee to have the tools, flexibility, and accessibility that they require. And is also a leading member of the GSK Global Disability ERG Network. Now, each speaker has 8 minutes. We will then have a few minutes for a more general discussion before I open it to the floor for questions. Please remember, your questions do not go in the chat, but yes, they do go in the Q&As. And so without more further ado, Nick, can I turn it over to you, please? Take us through the story, everything we need.
But felt it was now the time we really wanted to push this agenda further. And therefore the council was created to try and develop those and embed those practices worldwide. And the group is, or the council is accountable for doing that. The council itself provides the governance that shapes our journey towards being a more consistently disability confident and inclusive company across all of our operations worldwide. As I say, I've been privileged to chair this group for the last just over 3 years now. Now, one of the things that I'd say is vitally important for the success of any council is having the right membership. it's really important to have senior leader participation. And in fact, all of GSK's IND councils are chaired by a member of our executive team, our corporate executive team, or CET. We also have representatives from all the different business units. So that's our pharma, vaccines, and consumer healthcare business units, plus representatives from the functions as well, which play a key part, whether that's tech, our real estate team, procurement, finance, compliance, etc. as well. It's really important to have that cross-business representation, but it can't just be people who are passionate about disability. It's got to be people who are prepared to be a champion within their business lines, people who can be held accountable for actually implementing some of the council decisions and actually ensuring that the objectives and priorities we put in place are really getting embedded in the organisation. Now, as well as having senior leader representation, there's three other very important people on our council. One of them is Andy Garrett, who's here today, but Andy is one of the co-leads of our employee resource group, the Disability Confidence Network. So he and the other co-lead are members of the group. And then we also have an external advisor, and that is Kate Nash from Purple Space. And I think it's really good to have somebody like Kate who can be independent, be almost like our conscious, just to make sure we're doing the right things, provide us that external advice as well. And she's a really sort of beneficial member of our team. Now, council members are accountable for implementing our decisions, on delivering on our objectives, and a number of them are actually leading some of our work streams as well through their own actual day-to-day activities as well. And as I mentioned, they're people who really need to be able to champion the disability inclusion within their business lines. So we really do count on them, and I really do hold them accountable for making sure that that does happen. Now, it's really important that the council monitors the voice of the customer, and we do this by getting feedback from our Disability Confidence Network employee resource groups. And myself and other council members will regularly join sessions to hear from the people what they have to say. And I must say, it's really good to hear when things, the positive things that are happening, but from time to time we hear issues where things aren't working the way we intended them to. And it's really important when we hear this that we're able to take action. And this helps to really clearly define the priorities for the council. So we developed our 3-year measurable strategic plan. And then within that as well, we have a 12-month plan with clear objectives, which are then signed off by our corporate executive team. I take them to the executive team and to our CEO for formal sign-off, just to make sure they're comfortable with the direction we're moving in. Then once you've got the plan in place and your objectives, it's really important that you measure against the progress. And I would sort of strongly endorse that you do this in the same way for all of your other business priorities. It's no different from any other business objective. Leaders need to be held accountable. When we find that objectives are, not being sort of falling behind, it's good to understand where the blockers are, what's not working, so that we can take action as well. And this has worked well for our council. Now, just to share with you, just to give you a view of what we're looking at the moment, the 3 areas of focus that we identified over our strategic plan are, first of all, one, continue to invest in creating a more accessible and usable built space. So this was all about assessing all of our GSK sites worldwide against our own inclusive build standards, but also against local standards as well. And then developing plans to do remediation or improvements. Now, with this, GSK is a massive company, operations worldwide. You can't do this all at once across the whole of our site. So it's really important that we're able to assess the most important sites first, and then prioritize the ones where we can make the biggest difference. This is going to be a multi-year program, and you do have to be realistic when you set these objectives to avoid the disappointment of not being able to do this everywhere all in one go. The other area, and you're going to hear more about this from our workplace adjustment service. So initially we focused on US, UK. We also then moved into Belgium. We now want to roll this out further globally, so all of our locations worldwide can benefit from these workplace adjustments, and every employee has the option. Andy will talk more about that in a few minutes. And then to me, personally, I think one of the most critical areas to me is actually building the skills and knowledge so that our people become disability confident. We're doing this in a number of different ways. We have training that's available for both employees and for rolling out. We're also doing leader awareness sessions as well. And the more we can educate people in disability confidence, we find the better they are at helping to champion the number of initiatives we have and really understanding what we're trying to deliver on here. So those would be sort of a high-level tour of our council, Susan. If you were asking for, what are the most important things, I would say, first of all, it's having a senior leader participation and that accountability. I would say it's being able to have a clear and bold ambition. So really be bold in what you want to achieve. And as I said, you need to treat all of these objectives and priorities the same way as any other business priority and hold people accountable for doing this as well. So they would be my top tips, along with making sure you get voice of the customer input as well.
Remember to unmute it. I say, I love that bit about treating it like any other business objective. And for me, one of the benefits of the disability confidence you talk about is that colleagues, even in, say, procurement, get the confidence to say, we can manage this just like any other business objective. We don't need to worry all the time that somehow we don't have the expertise we need. I think it's brilliant. Great.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Very much. And so, Margaret, if we could just move on now to your experience at Accenture and what you find is particularly helpful, because of course, how senior players take responsibility and drive change is very much about what the Gsk Council is doing. And I'm looking at a human being who drives change on this issue as the disability champion on a daily basis. So tell us about it.
Yeah, very much so. So one, I'm Margaret Smith, and I am wearing a bright pink shawl. I have white hair. I'm wearing glasses, and I literally can't see without them. And I'm sitting in front of a gray background. And this is a personal passion of mine, though I do admit I have an enormous amount of experience with hidden disability. I have less experience with visible disability. So I have been working very hard to educate myself as I implement the Accenture vision as to how we're going to do this. So Susan, if you're okay, I just want to kind of dive in a little bit on what I think is critical to make the program work. We have 500,000 people in 40 or 50 countries, depending on how you count countries, in about 800 buildings. And our CEO has set an agenda which is critical around diversity of all types. And she also has a personal passion in this space. And so it has been incumbent on all of us to implement what is not just the right thing to do, but is also a massive hidden cache of talent, because disability to me is actually not disability, it's other abled. And I come to that quite, I have 4 kids, none of the 4 kids came about learning very easily. And I have learned a whole lot about both mental issues, but also learning ability issues. And what I've learned is it is, for me personally, more appropriate to talk about being other abled. So I come to this with a real passion in this space, as did Julie. So one of the things we are doing in Accenture is we are unbelievably visible champions and active allies, right? So we talk about the subject openly. We have constant positive intent. I think people, when they know and trust where your heart is, it becomes something that they believe you are trying to get right, even when you occasionally trip up and get it wrong. And it is also a place where we are constantly saying we are accessible advocates for everybody, regardless of ability. So people can come talk to us as to how they are finding the Accenture journey. And it's a complicated place on its best day. So our job is to make it easier and open for everybody. So inclusiveness is the order of the day. We led a partnership with Disability In and the American Association of People with Disabilities on getting to equal, the disability inclusion advantage, that highlights some interesting facts that most people don't know, which is company leaders who embrace a culture of equality for employing and supporting people with disabilities grow sales at almost 3 times faster and profits at 4 times faster than their peers. So there's not just a human imperative to do this, there's a business imperative to do this. And so if you think more about dollars than think about humanity, that's okay. I can absolutely focus on that. At Accenture, this commitment starts at the top with our executive chairman and chief exec and our board. We expect all of our leaders at all levels to support disability and inclusion, even if I can't say it. At Accenture, they have to be vocal advocates internally and externally. They have to set aside budgets supporting disability and inclusion, and they have to earmark disability and inclusion as a key business priority. And I am a big believer, you don't perform unless you're measured. And we absolutely make a point of making very visible this space so that everybody understands that people are watching. It is about doing the right thing, and it is about really unleashing hidden talent. At Accenture, we manage disability and inclusion very strategically, and it reinforces our commitment at the highest level. We have a global council. I was very interested to hear about the GSK. It's very, very similar. That constitutes a sponsor and senior leadership from all the functions that both define the strategy, but also have to operationalize it. So given our large scale of operations, we have similar councils in most of our major countries with local sponsors partnering with the global council so that what we do here filters down throughout. Accenture is also a proud member of the Valuable 500, consortium of organizations and leaders who've committed to putting disability inclusion on their business leadership agenda. And the Valuable 500 companies also agree, you make a commitment, you share that commitment internally and externally, and then you validate the commitment to the Valuable 500 with the signature of the CEO. And we have been very, very passionate about that. One of the things that is complicated in Accenture, given our size and scale, is how do you ensure consistency for applicants and colleagues and customers, and how are people treated around the world? So we have built a very uniform culture of inclusion. For a company our size, we do have a very strong core culture that it doesn't matter where you go on the globe, that culture is everywhere, okay? And we have built large-scale global programs. We do allow some local customization and execution, but we measure traction and support around those programs globally and locally, which is the big deal. So it's global and it's local. We measure disability inclusion through a biannual scorecard. It gives us a clear view of the traction of how the program's going. We demonstrate our commitment through heavy investments in critical projects. So for example, we partnered with the Center for Accessibility to create workplace accessibility standards that are ISO compliant. At Accenture, we have a disability accommodation and adjustment request tool that allows people with any disability in a very simple, hassle-free manner to access whatever support and accommodation they need. And it's funded through centralized budgets. So you never get the question, oh, you need a special headset, or you need, in the case of a couple of our countries, a specialized wheelchair, where we're actually providing all that equipment, and no one will ever say to you, ooh, we can't afford that, or we can't budget for that. It is all done centrally. So if you put something into the request tool, you're going to get it answered and you're going to get what you need. We've set up an accessibility center of excellence to showcase accessibility technologies. We launched our first one in the Philippines, and it was breathtaking. So anybody with a disability can go to the Accessibility Center and they can try out what helps them be productive. So for example, if you're hearing impaired, we have 35 different headsets, and you can try and use those 35 different headsets to see what works with your hearing aids, what does assist you, what doesn't assist you, et cetera. You're sight impaired, we have, you know, a bunch of different, everything from monitors that behave differently to screens, to Braille keyboards, to you name it. And you can go to the Accessibility Center, and rather than being concerned about buying a piece of kit that you don't know whether it's going to work for you, or not being able to afford the latest kit, right? Because this is an area that has hot with development, you're able to go try those things out. So it went so well in the Philippines, and had truthfully life-changing impact on people with disabilities, where one of the women we interviewed said she went from being a burden on her family to being the only person employed in a white-collar job at a blue chip company. And she was now the proudest member of the family, and her mother and father were interviewed. And, you know, you couldn't stop but realize that this is not just about unleashing talent. It is not just about providing people opportunity. It's about really changing people's lives by giving them what they need. So it was so successful in Manila. I'm actually in New York today, launching the New York Center. So we've put now 9 of them around the globe. And we will be continuing to put them in all of our core designs. So if you open a new major office at Accenture, you have to have an accessibility center. The preventative technologies that we talk about, you know, polarized lenses, tester sunglasses, blue light filter sunglasses, standing desk converters, desk risers, desk bikes, if that's important to you. We also are structuring our offices with very conscious on invisible disability. So for example, if you are on the spectrum, or you are in the world of ADHD, which I have way too much experience with, you know, we have quiet spaces, we have spaces that are electronics free, which for a company that lives the digital life, you know, you can actually get to quiet space and focus without the chaos around you if that's what you need. We drive accessibility training across all of Accenture. And so that people become confident, not just talking about it, but knowing what it means to say, I'm going to make this accessible. Accenture Labs also develops assistive technologies to support people with disabilities. They have a program called Tech for Good, led by the labs, focusing on innovative technology solutions, enabling people with disabilities to have the same working experience as everybody else. We have a leadership development program for people with disabilities called Abilities Unleashed. And we also run a global supplier inclusion program to ensure that all of our suppliers are as committed as we are to accessibility goals. The list is really long, and I could talk for another hour, which is not what they want me to do, so I won't do that. But from my point of view, and I will close with this, if I were to give advice to senior leaders have to be held accountable. You have to be held accountable for creating a culture of inclusion and diversity. You have to make sure that everybody, regardless of ability, age, gender, socioeconomic status, whether you have kids or not, which was a huge thing in the last year of COVID, has the same opportunities and support, helping to level the playing field. Leaders need to understand the complexity of the disability and inclusion landscape. They need to understand how to put the building blocks in place that an organization needs to come together and deliver a truly inclusive environment. They have to be visible, vocal, have an open door policy. Disability, inclusion, and building an inclusive environment needs to be a key building block of every business priority, including everything from the practical, setting aside budgets, having accountable goals, et cetera. I will share one tiny thing at the end. I had a kind of eye-opening moment myself a few years ago. I was asked on Mental Health Week or month, whatever it was, to do a video, and I was very open. I have a sister who's bipolar. I have a husband who has a panic disorder. I have sons, 3 out of 4 of whom suffer from anxiety and depression, and they come by the chemistry, honestly, right? The genetics aren't good in our crowd. And I was very open, and I got a phone call saying, we need you to pull your video down. And I said, why? And they said, because your husband and your kids will be embarrassed that you shared the story. Actually, I was going to say my husband and kids don't work for Accenture, but actually some of that has changed, so I can't say that anymore. So I said, look, why don't I go just talk to them? Because we're pretty open about this. So I sat down at dinner, told everybody what I'd done. I said, Mom, can we see the video? I played the video. They're like, what's wrong with the video? All that's true.
Okay, great.
And, people came forward. 2 years ago, I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and when some people retreat with breast cancer and quietly deal with it, I was like, no, I'm going out on LinkedIn. Chemo is going to be public. Double mastectomy is going to be public. 30% of the world will get cancer. It will cause untold changes to all of us, and we need to talk about it. So I have a very personal, inclusive approach to this, and I will shut up now, Susan.
You obviously should have had a lot longer in this session, but however,
no, that's okay.
Very disciplined. We've just got our little inputs, and then we get into conversation. That's fascinating. Thank you so much. And I'm going to move quickly then on to Andy. Andy, when it comes to this operationalizing world, you're the person who is in effect delivering that promise that no matter where you are, when you work for GSK, you will get equal, dignified, equitable access to the tools, flexibility, and support that you need in order to do your best. So tell us how you do that.
Yeah, hi everyone, Andy Garrett. A little bit about myself. I'm a white middle-aged man. I've been working at GSK around 5 years, just coming up 5 years. I've got a long history of working in disability inclusion and disability networks. I used to be in the police in London, and I was involved in setting up disability networks there. And I came to GSK on a project in 2016 to help operationalize, as Susan says, the workplace adjustments service offer. We talk a lot at GSK, quite rightly, about living our values, and they include things like transparency and integrity and respect. So of course, support for workplace adjustments or accommodations, if that's what they're known as in your market, for employees, that's a key feature for us in being, an inclusive and a modern employer. And of course, trust being one of our core values. It's interesting, unsurprisingly, we find that people don't tend to ask for things that they don't need. But we do recognize, it's a big step sometimes for an employee or a candidate for employment to ask for an adjustment or an accommodation that they need, and perhaps not knowing if it's going to be supported. But for us at GSK, the value, in providing adjustments, accommodations, it supports our building of disability confidence that Nick referred to, and that's for both employees and managers. That's confidence of the employee to ask for what they need, confidence of the manager to support that individual to work in the ways that work for them, perhaps if that's differently. But of course, to drive inclusion and ultimately to enable productivity. The service is about equipping people with what they need to be successful. And essentially what we built, we're making it easier for our people to ask questions. So they might have some uncertainty. They can come to my Centre of Excellence. They can ask questions about the process, but of course, then they can make their request, and we can, through that process, they can secure, the tools and the flexibility that they need. We do a central approvals process again, so employees don't feel they have to have a difficult conversation with their manager. Not that it should be difficult, but we know that sometimes that's relevant, and sometimes the employees don't quite know what the right solution is for their circumstances. We can arrange through our suppliers an adjustment needs assessment, and that's able to recommend then the appropriate solution for an individual's particular work circumstances. And that's available to all employees. They might have an injury or a health condition or a disability. So it's not limited to those who qualify in any country as having a disability. Our service line is delivered by people like myself that have got experience in working with disability and adjustments. Midway through my career, in my early 30s, I developed a central field vision condition called macular dystrophy. So things, the central field of vision is very blurry for me, and it's not something for which glasses are really very much help at all. So I'm not able to drive, and I have to be able to blow up content on screens to be able to read things. And of course that had implications for the work that I was doing. So it became ultimately important for me to have the adjustments and the tools to enable me to contribute effectively in work and to continue building a career. And at GSK, we've partnered with a specialist adjustments provider, a company called Microlink. And of course, they've got a supply chain of third-party organizations that can deliver the solutions where we need them and in multiple markets. Nick mentioned that we started in the UK and we extended that service into the US, now Belgium, Canada, Ireland. We're working towards India and other markets. And that's really about building the supply chain to be able to deliver those products. The service line is available for advice in any market. So employees in any of our markets that are not sure or managers not sure what to do, then they can still come through our service line for some advice about doing the right thing to equip people for success. And of course, in the operationalized element, having a tracked service line, which we started back in 2017, we've now got some measures showing the benefits. The quantitative measures, if you like, with an average case cost running fairly consistently at below £700 and equivalent in other currencies, but also the duration at each process step, so that we can identify pinch points and work on problems if they arise, to drive efficiencies in deliver that. And that's reassuring when I'm presenting to executive boards in different countries to launch the service. They want to know a bit about the metrics, about how it works, how quick it can take to resolve an adjustment request. And of course, qualitatively, really important that we ensure, we're getting high levels of satisfaction with the service, from service users and the line managers. And of course, that feeds into employee engagement. Nick mentioned that the adjustment service is one of several work streams within the Global Disability Council, our 3-year disability confidence action plan. So I get involved, as part of my day job, but also as co-lead of the Disability Employee Resource Group, working with my colleague in the US, Tracy. We had a project last year. We've developed a new inclusive design standard for our estate based on international standards and inclusion principles. And that's we can use that. We're delivering those independent site accessibility assessments, and as Nick mentioned, the capital investment over time to drive accessibility at the site level. And of course, we're running a very diverse range of working environments, be that office space, manufacturing, R&D labs. And of course, increasingly over the recent year, we can now support people in their home setting, whether that be with, standard furniture solutions or something more specific if they have a disability or a health condition. So it's important that we're able to equip people in whatever setting that they're working at. Other work we've been able to involved with as leaders, so we have a technology work stream. So Tracy and I are able to inform the operational aspects of that for building accessibility into things like our global collaboration tools. Can't underestimate the value in accessible technology. We're working a lot with Microsoft in that sense. And of course, all those work streams within the Global Disability Council are all driven towards that disability confidence at whatever stage in the employee life cycle, and obviously through our core business services. Nick mentioned the employee engagement calls, our membership in the network really value the opportunity to speak to senior leaders, to share their lived experience. When it's working well, that's great, but if things aren't working so well, then they've got access to share their thoughts. And of course, all that information was really useful for us in doing a baseline assessment on the disability standard, which helped to set our 3-year plan for the next 3 years to drive disability confidence. So I'm looking forward to any questions that you all might have.
Thank you very much, Andy. And so if we could just take a few minutes for questions. I see one has come in from someone in the audience asking Margaret about what you actually put in your disability scorecard. What are the KPIs you're looking for? And it kind of related to a question I was going to ask anyway of everyone, which is how do you set standards worldwide and avoid compliance? And perhaps a bit more about how do you monitor customer colleague satisfaction when you're setting those standards? So Margaret, could we start with you? Just a couple of minutes, if you will. What do you look for in your disability scorecard? And are you monitoring satisfaction of employees and customers as part of that?
Yeah, so we measure the number of requests we get, how fast we respond to those requests, what the satisfaction of the employees who have self-identified with a disability, right? Because of course you do have to self-identify. And we're constantly out measuring that. And all of that is in our scorecard. We then look globally at where countries kind of rank against each other, because that gives you some indication as to how serious the leadership in the country is taking it. And when you see, steady increases in the US and you don't see a steady increase in India, you have an indication that maybe the leadership isn't giving it the same voice. And then we go investigate why is that? Because we have a pretty good idea what the population of disability should be in terms of what, how many headsets we should be getting per 100 people, et cetera, et cetera. And when we don't see those metrics, we kind of dig in to figure out why.
Thank you very much. Nick? In terms of how GSK is measuring either employee satisfaction?
Yes, sorry, I was having trouble with my video coming back on there.
I was just trying to, carry you in while you were.
Yeah, actually very similar to Margaret, same sort of areas there, responsiveness and, effectiveness of, some of those adjustments that take place. I think one of the areas where, we've also been measuring as well is a number of employees or managers who are taking the disability confidence training. Now, initially, in certain parts of the business, we've seen quite a small uptick in the taking of this training. So that's when, I introduced actually a dashboard for all of the members of the council, and actually, every single business unit or every single function represented, we could see how many employees had actually taken the training and had taken the training since the last meeting as well. So we turned this into a little bit more of a competitive sort of nature within the council itself, and found that did have effect. And I think once you do start measuring something, you can actually make a difference as well. We didn't measure at the very beginning, and actually I was quite horrified when I joined the council and realised how low the uptake of the actual training actually was. The other thing you talked about there as well is about, compliance, etc. And I would sort of urge everybody not to get bogged down in all the legal complexities and that element. If you put best practice in place, you will actually comply with all of the regulations. If you really look at what the business actually needs, what employees with disabilities need, and put that in place, you won't have to do the tick the box from a compliance perspective. It will just happen.
Well, I'm interested in how you and Margaret counter the compliance culture we see in many multinationals, where the premise is we will make adjustments for people who can prove they qualify in local law as disabled, because they see that as what it's all about. So even in countries like Germany in particular, where there's a strong quota culture since World War I, nobody's fault, it's just been there forever. How do you get across the message that actually compliance is counterproductive? Starting with you, Nick, how do you communicate that?
I think for example, with adjustments, you don't ask for the medical reason. So you're not asking for the medical reason, you're understanding why somebody needs the adjustment. A medical condition, we don't need to be aware of that. So I think that's one of the ways you can do it.
But I'm interrupting you there to say, but in most companies, the decision as to how they make adjustments would be controlled by the guys who run Germany, who run Poland, who run Indonesia. They're the ones who assume. Do you say head office has to tell them that that's not acceptable anymore, that they have to do that?
As we've talked about what Andy's doing, we're having that as a central program with the same criteria, wherever it's deployed globally as well. So if we're not asking for a medical reason in the UK, we shouldn't be asking for a medical reason in another part of the world as well. And it's getting that mindset in place. I would say there are challenges along the way. I told you that, you know, when I listened to the employee resource group, the Disability Confidence Network, and had some of the feedback, I've heard some horrific stories of where managers haven't allowed workplace adjustments. And when I hear those stories, I want to take action and make sure that we do something about it, because that shouldn't happen. And actually the increased, you know, employee disability confidence awareness is actually reducing the number of times I'm hearing those messages now. But you do have to keep on sort of playing that message over and over again. You can't say it too many times.
Indeed. Margaret, on the same theme.
Susan, yeah, one of the fixes for us is structural. So my job is global, and there's a version of me in every market unit, and all of Accenture is built by market units. And so I meet with my team, which is the many versions of me around the globe, twice a week. And we very much talk about culture. And so when this comes up as a topic, you know, I'm very clear from the top, this is not how we're going to do this, everybody. This is how we're going to do it. And that's what everybody implements. So we've kind of stamped it out from day one. I also think, to your compliance point, there's something else that we've been really conscious of. This is an area where the law and culture are a little bit behind reality. And so if we all get out here in front on this, we're going to change the compliance discussion and the legal discussion, because we're going to be setting the bar by which others get measured, right? And so I think, you know, rather than just meeting the compliance in some places is actually way too low, right? If that's all you're doing, you're not really doing much. And so what we've been and in several countries, there is no real compliance measure. Or the compliance measure to me is a little daft. You know, 1% of your people need to be this. And I'm like, well, if we can't find people productive jobs and ways to add back, and the offset is we can write a check, we're not really spiritually getting done what we're trying to get done here. So the group that works on it has that constant global, local filter down, and that is a constant culture changer to stop what you're talking about. And I, like Nick, when I hear a horror story, and occasionally I do, I can't say we get it right all the time, I get personally involved, right? I you know, ring up and say, hey guys, what do you think you're doing? Can you imagine being in that? Empathy is the #1 word of the game, right? And empathy requires conversation or an innate talent that, you know, only a subset of people possess. And so we have to go constantly have that conversation.
But of course, what you've both done in your organizations is, in effect, the message, we only say no, we won't make that adjustment, goes up the line. Whereas
yeah,
the decision to say no is left at the local manager, and the senior guys have no idea it's happening all the time, because it's, you know, it's lost in the organizational noise. So that's fantastic. I've got so many questions. I have to either talk very fast myself or ask you all to talk very fast. So there's a question here for Margaret and Nick. How do you get better responses asking people to self-identify? It's called SelfID campaigns. Do you have campaigns, or do you just work on it day after day, encouraging people to share this information with you? Any tips there?
Actually, we've been doing a lot on this, and sort of we've had campaigns about being yourself at work and being at your best, and we tried to link it in with that as well. Actually, when you look at the self-assessment stats, actually self-IDing a disability is the lowest, especially if you think about the number of people, employees who do have disabilities, whether they're visible or invisible. It is the sort of lowest of all the self-ID classifications that we have. So it's something we have been trying to push a little bit more, let people know that it's okay. And the reason we want to know about this is because we can make sure that our environment, our office space is optimal for people with disabilities, to actually perform at their best. We actually, want people to sort of be in the office to do their best work, and that means having the right environment. I think the whole pandemic and more remote working has enabled that a little bit more, and people have been sort of for some reason be more confident to actually self-ID. But we're starting at a low level, and we've got to get much higher in this space and increase people's confidence to actually do this.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything Nick said. But that was part of harking back to people, leaders getting out there, right? Whether it's LinkedIn, whether it's a video post, whatever it is, this constant exposure. And so you'll hear a lot of Accenturites talk about truly human and authentic. And what we're really saying is bring your entire self to work. And we will make that an acceptable thing. And so as leaders, we are all encouraged. We had the misfortune and fortune, as most things in life are, of about 6 or 7 years ago, our general counsel, who was very, very popular, was hit by a drunk driver and lost his leg. And overnight, we had an unbelievable, visible, disabled champion. And it was a visible disability. And we all, worked with Chad on his way back into what his new normal was. And he became kind of the champion in the space. And in a way, that was the greatest thing that ever happened. Every negative gives you a positive. And in this case, that drunk driver gave us an unbelievable champion who took it to Accenture 20 years forward in a year, and made the talking about of disabilities, because by the end of a year, you didn't know he was disabled. If he was wearing trousers, his walk was the same as mine, but he made sure it was front and center all the time, so that people understood that it was acceptable. And I agree with Nick, it's a journey. We're not where we need to be, but we're doing it by all of us talking constantly about the world we're in.
And I'd like to come back to the word Andy used, which is trust. Because what I'm also hearing is that if you trust your people and just say, okay, well, what do you need in order? My favorite is, if you need a left-handed mouse, do you need a letterfinger doctor that proves you need a left-handed mouse? You give a guy a left-handed mouse, right? And so the word trust takes time, and being seen not to suffer when you say, actually, I could use an adjustment, and the word gets out that nothing adverse happened, right? That it actually, you can trust the company with that information. Makes a huge difference. Andy, I wanted to move on because we have a specific question for you. And then this issue of how you measure improvement, which links to how many people are prepared to share the information, I'd like to come back to before we finished. But did you see that there's a question here for you specifically? Do your workplace guidelines address how to address accessibility at every stage of design and construction processes? So right from the very beginning. Can you talk a bit about your workplace? You can see your name, but not your face. Is that because the technology has thrown you away? Oh, you are.
It has. I'm there, but it's not showing my video for some reason.
Well, do we still have?
Never mind. I can talk. That's fine.
Okay.
It's just the way it is. Technology is not playing. But yes, absolutely. We developed an inclusive design standard for our working environments. Well, back in 2017, but we've recently updated that to those international standards. So, for example, those standards are issued to for all programs where we're doing a refurbishment project, or we're doing a site acquisition, or some site development. Those standards go to the suppliers to make sure that the inclusive aspects, are built into those working environments. When we're designing the work from home guidelines, we've got a program of performance with choice, giving people the option to have ergonomic solutions at home, and those things are fine for the standard desk, chair, monitor, things that employees might need. So, and as an enhancement to that, you can also request through our service support with getting, I suppose I'd call it the non-standard thing that you need. So the disability adjustments, like Nick was saying, it's not predicated on you having a disability. We're trying to move away from the medical model. We're trying to design inclusion into our workplaces, and design inclusion into our collaboration tools, and into our working environments. Really about normalizing that injury, health condition, and disabilities, that's part of life's rich pattern. It's part of our candidate pipeline. We welcome that diversity. And of course, no longer does one size in the working environment fit all. We're here to equip people with everything they need to be successful, and to make that easier for them. So yeah, designing in inclusion is crucial.
And of course, Andy, and I'm relating now to a question in the Q&A, you don't ask people when they apply if they have a disability. They don't have to tell you at that point, but you
Correct.
know that between 10 and 12% of the workforce for any large organization is likely to have a disability. And you know that people become disabled often after 5 years in work, right? Disability is associated with being 40 or 45. And so having a process that delivers adjustments is based on the assumption that you already have people with disabilities working for you. You want to be a good employer and access candidates in the future. And of course, people will become disabled while working for you. Would you agree with that? Yes or no? So I can move on to the next question.
Indeed. Yep.
Thanks, Andrew. Because there's a couple of questions here in our last few minutes. And one here is, how are you reporting on your progress in terms of disability inclusion? Where do you tell your outside stakeholders about the progress you've made and in what domains? And the question is relating to gender pay gap reporting, which drove some change and didn't solve that problem, but it drove some change. So what where do you tell people what you're up to and the positive benefits it's having on your business? Nick, do you want to start us off, and then I'll go to Margaret?
Yeah, well, first of all, we're committed to reporting in a number of different areas, whether that's, gender pay, diversity in senior leadership, and there's a number of areas that we've been looking at where we can do that. And now we're also looking to see how we can commit to more reporting in the disability space as well, recognizing there's not many companies doing this at the moment. And actually, because of the self-ID piece, it does actually hamper some of the accuracy towards that. But unless you actually start somewhere and think about at the beginning about doing this, you're never going to start the journey at all and always be at the beginning. So, this year we've made a commitment to move towards that in the public domain. I'm not sure of the actual time commitment on that yet, but it's something that we've signed up to actually do, along with a number of other top companies as well recently. So unless you measure and actually unless you report it and publish the information, you don't actually move anywhere.
No, it takes longer, that's for sure. Mm-hmm. Margaret, quickly.
Yeah, I don't have a better answer. I agree. There's not really a central place right now of somebody demanding it. But what we are doing is the internal measurement, and then I'm putting it into what I provide to the guy who runs responsible business, which has sustainability, inclusion, and diversity, and all of the other responsible business and corporate citizenship stuff in it. And then he uses it in his marketing message.
I think we're seeing the opportunity to shift away slightly from what you were talking about in terms of inaccurate data, because you don't know how many people have self-declared, if that language, to looking at documenting the impact of best practice, because we know you can cut sickness absence, you enhance productivity, you enhance employee engagement. And most importantly, perhaps in some domains, you're cutting the cost of formal grievances and litigation by best practice. So I think finding some measures there is a good start point. Would you not agree? Yeah.
I would agree. I would say in my speak, what you're talking about is highlighting the value. And if we can find a way to highlight the value of the program, that will encourage the self-identification and will also organically grow the value. So I completely agree.
And what we're seeing, ironically, is that in many companies, HR aren't sharing the data in terms of sickness absence and lost productivity, if they have it, with people who are then trying to implement programs which would improve, because they're faster and better giving adjustments to their candidates, that they can cut sickness, they can reduce the costs associated with this. So I think the attention, I know Valuable 500 is making this a priority. I think attention in that domain is going to be extremely useful internally, as well as in terms of conveying to the world that things are getting better. They must be.
And Susan, there's something to be said with your recruiters. I've done some work with our recruiters, trying to make them aware of the adjustments, accommodation support that we have available, because of that widens our candidate pool, and it widens the people's confidence to apply to opportunities to come into our organisation, because they know that we can equip them with what they need.
Excellent. Makes perfect sense. And how do you build disability inclusion leaders from other parts of the world? Right. So how do you address the fact that in some countries, they're still working to say definitions of disability that date back to World War I? How do you inspire them to kind of think differently? Because I'm conscious of you, Margaret, talking about learning directly from people with disabilities. Is there a way in which, by getting that conversation going with those individuals who may never have talked to disabled before, that they kind of get a different perspective? Margaret?
Yeah, we've got a very public global program. So it is, I'm not finding as much difficulty there. What I'm finding a difficulty doing, Susan, is moving people from writing a check to impacting real change, right? And in countries where they have had quotas, for lack of a better term, for many years, if you don't meet the quota, you write a check. There has been a laziness to the approach. And what we're now doing is spending a lot of time highlighting what success looks like. I believe that most people have a slightly competitive edge to them. And when you show them what good looks like, somebody somewhere is going to go, oh, we can do better than that. And that is exactly what is spawned it, right? So I'm kind of sparking a little bit of, just the competitive edge that kind of lives within Accenture, and saying, hey, you should see what the, Filipino team did with their interactive center. This is amazing. And overnight I had 9 new centers, right? And that is working.
You remind me, before I come back to you, Nick, on this, there were questions about those centers that you described, the one that was launched recently in the Philippines. Where would our guests go for more information about those centers?
I'm going to go say, we did some video stuff, marketing video stuff. I'm going to go try to find it, and I'll get it back to you, and then you can distribute it to whoever wants it.
Nick, how do you persuade the others to get your worldview?
Yeah, well, actually, in my sort of day-to-day role, I head up ethics and compliance, and that's all about sort of getting the right culture and right behaviors across the whole company. And one of the things I've learned is I've traveled in over 50 different countries. I spent a significant time in the US. I spent over a year in China. You can't have a one-size-fits-all way of doing this. You really do have to think about what works in different environments and cultures. So what you do in the West may be very different to the East. What you do in China is very different to Japan. So you really have to understand the culture there. You have to sort of bring people on board who are passionate about this subject, and then trust them to be able to build their programs locally using the sort of the concepts that we put together and the culture we've developed from the centre, but being able to have those adjustments to try and make it work a little bit when it goes out into some of the more remote locations and some of the challenges we have in those places.
Right. Well, we've got about 30 seconds, I think. Margaret, anything that you would like to say, last little message for our audience before we finish, and I say thank you very much.
1, I was honored to be here, thank you. And 2, I am a big believer that if you can't talk about it, you can't fix it. We have to make this front page for all of us as leaders, and it's uncomfortable and it's difficult, and it doesn't matter, we got to do it, because we get to change the storyline. And I think that's hugely important.
I'd like to add, it'd be good if we could have some fun, but we'll have to come back to that in the next webinar. And Nick?
Maybe 2023, Susan. I've wiped out fun for the last couple of years.
Nick, your final.
Exactly the same for me. So it's an honor to have been here today to share some of our experiences. I really like hearing from others about what works well and what doesn't work well. And as Margaret said, you can't just talk about this, you've really got to get into it. That's what really makes a difference.
Excellent, thank you. Andy, final words?
Yeah, I think again, echoing, this is a global learning community. That's what I like about GBDN. Yeah, we want to share what's working well, but equally learn from others. Rather than try and reinvent the wheel in our own organisations. This is a global learning community to get it right, to build inclusion, because that benefits everyone.
Marvelous. Well, what a lovely way to end, Andy. And we didn't even pay you to say that, did we? Fantastic. Well, that takes us back to thanking you on behalf of the ILO's Global Business Disability Network for being with us. Thank you to our speakers. And for further information about the network, if you're not already members and you're a multinational, well, I don't know why you're not members, but do check out the website. And I believe that we'll have the link for you soon in terms of where the case study, if you like, the profile that I did with our colleagues from GSK about how their council actually works is now available on the website. Please send it to all your friends, whether they want it or not. Required reading. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.